The suit filed back in 2021 accuses the tech company of spying on users through the voice assistant Siri. Users say their private conversations were being recorded by their devices after Siri was unintentionally activated. Although a settlement was agreed upon, the company has denied doing anything wrong. There is a hearing tentatively scheduled for August to officially approve this settlement.
Does it help sell more phones? Are people buying because there's privacy?
Hello and welcome back. This is episode 27 of The Lockdown. Now, I've had a cold with actually a bit of a fever, so I don't know if it was COVID or what it was, but I'd lost my voice for the best part of this week. It's now Friday evening on June 13th, and you can probably still hear it in my voice, but at least I can talk to you. Now, this is not going to be against Apple necessarily. I have a love-hate relationship with their devices. I personally don't believe they are anti-privacy in the way that they're sharing our data, they're selling it to third parties and letting data brokers grab hold of it. I really don't think that's happening. However, I have a big problem with their ecosystem. There was a $95 million lawsuit. You could probably get $20 from it if you want to file a claim. I don't think it's worth doing it. Now, I did some research into this. If you did want to file a claim for the $20, first off, I would value your time more highly than $20. But if you did, your data is not going to suddenly become public on some claim public database. That said, there's still going to be third parties involved in order to process your claim. Whether that's going to be Apple, of course, there's going to be law firms, settlement administrators, courts, payment processors, and obviously, if you're in the United States at least, the IRS for tax purposes. I really don't think it's worth doing all of that for $20. Now, the main problem I have with Apple is lock-in. Whether it's the Lightning versus USB-C connector debate or just this whole Apple ecosystem, they've managed to manipulate human psychology so well that still to this day, people are queuing up outside the Apple store to get the latest device. And in fact, it was a friend of mine, I won't mention names, but he said, I can't wait to get the new iPhone. This was some time ago when Apple Intelligence was announced. So I'd love to have AI on my phone. I said, why? Why do you need that? But the biggest issue I have is the fact they turn on telemetry by default without asking. Now, for example, Apple Intelligence, there's two settings you need to be mindful of. Most of my family have iPhones, apart from myself, obviously. But I've noticed after every update, Apple Intelligence is either turned back on, and if it's not, if you go to settings and then the privacy settings, there's the Apple Intelligence report, which keeps getting turned back on. Now, this report says they're sending keystrokes, what you're searching for. All this intrusive stuff that Siri seems to harvest is being sent to Apple. And again, I don't believe they're using that to sell to advertisers or line their pockets by selling it to data brokers. I really don't think that's happening. But I don't trust Apple in their honesty when they are confronted about why, for example, they are suddenly on the privacy bandwagon. This was a few years ago. They skirt around the subject and say they've always cared about privacy. And I just want them to be honest. Now, what they've managed to do is create an army of an army of people that seem to obsess over the latest features, like the latest megapixel count in the camera, or this phone's got a better processor. It doesn't matter for what you're doing. If you get a phone, an iPhone from, say, 3 or 4 years ago, wipe it, install your apps on it, it's just fine. Now, yeah, in the past, another lawsuit, they were caught by intentionally slowing down the phone or shortening battery life to make people upgrade. But this is the whole point about trust. I just don't trust them. Now, my biggest regret is actually buying a MacBook. But I have to say this, it's a real love-hate relationship. The battery life, the fact it's so quiet, the performance, it's an M4 Pro, is phenomenal. I can take it on a flight. Compared to my old Lenovo Legion, I think the 7i Pro, is something like that. That thing would only last an hour and 30 minutes at best. The MacBook, has lasted all day on all the flights, several hours, and I've never actually had it run out of battery. But the reason I say it's my biggest regret is I actually had an email from someone recently saying that they've got a System 76 laptop and they would not look back. I would say I'm a huge fan of System 76, but I don't own one. I love what it looks like. I would love to know what the battery life is like. I wouldn't be able to cope if it was only a few hours. The biggest plus from the MacBook is the long battery life. Now, the way I stay private and secure in the MacBook is a number of things. I use Little Snitch, which is a bit like Simple Wall. So every program basically that wants to access the internet, I can allow or deny or even only allow it access to certain domains, which is great. I love that. But it's still not a fail-safe way of avoiding all the telemetry that Apple are taking on you. Now, if you go all the way back to, I think, episode 3, The Invisible Net, and why I use Graphene OS, that was a story about a cyclist that was riding around some neighborhood. There was telemetry or tracking, location tracking, that his Apple iPhone had revealed, or it might have been a Google phone, I can't remember now. But the point was, the FBI, law enforcement, had him at the location of a serious crime. He was caught in this net. I don't believe that me owning a MacBook and carrying that around is putting me at that risk. It's very low, but hey, it could happen. But I do make sure location tracking's turned off. I'm blocking as much as I can, and I'm certainly not signed in with an Apple ID. That's another ecosystem of lock-in that I want to avoid. Which brings me on, actually, to the subject of lock-in. I've worked in the software industry for a very long time. In fact, I joined VMware back in 2011, but worked at Amazon and other software vendors over the years. And I can tell you that something that, while software companies won't publicly talk about it, API lock-in and lock-in in general is a thing that they want to do. They want to have customers locked in because the last thing they want is customers using their product for a month and then moving to something else. And Apple seem to be the kings of this mindset, locking into the ecosystem. Look at iMessage, for example. I'm sure there was a time when there was talk about iMessage being available on Android phones. But of course, that would break their lock-in ecosystem, so that didn't happen. So the title of this podcast is Stop Playing the Game. That's lock down, not lock in. And the stop playing the game part is this. If you just take a step back of what's going on with social media, people are posting far too much on there. I'll get to that more in a moment, but there's social media, this craze over the latest Apple iPhone or the Apple Watch or whatever the device is. And it's a herd mentality. And I'm going to be blunt and to the point here. People want the latest iPhone because, look, if you have a 2 or 3-year-old iPhone, you must be some sort of peasant from the medieval times that can't afford it. In fact, it's got to a point where among teenagers, if they receive a message from someone with the green background, because it's a normal SMS message, then that person has got to be shunned out the group. It's ridiculous. But listen, I'm a grumpy old guy that grew up as a kid in the 80s. And these were the days I could go out and just tell the parents, I'll call you when I'm on the way home, and I'd find a phone box somewhere. And this was actually in England in the 80s. Phone boxes were actually the red phone boxes that you see on postcards and things like that. Now they're just an awful silver metal construction. Not the same thing as what it used to be. But anyway, so while I've been off sick, I've been also having time to think and do some observing. And the observation is that people love to follow trends. They want to fit in. They want to be like everyone else. And whether that means having the latest iPhone, like the people they look up to on social media, or wearing the latest clothes and fashion, but even to the more ridiculous side of things, posting the same old trash on LinkedIn. Now, I'm sure many of you share my sentiment here. I try and limit social media as much as possible. I don't have Facebook, I don't have Instagram, I don't have TikTok, I certainly don't have any of that nonsense. I have a LinkedIn profile, which is public. I do have a public persona. And my saying, as you know, now with the open source intelligence, defense and security framework is minimize what can be known. But that also means control what you do put out there. So sure, my picture is out there. I've had a professional headshot done. That's on my LinkedIn profile. It's on my website. But I'm certainly not sharing pictures of me every day grabbing my coffee or, I don't know, showing my car or the house I've just moved into. People are sharing far too much. And I think they do so because everyone else does it. It's the herd mentality. But ignorance is bliss, I suppose. They don't realise what OSINT can reveal. In fact, I mentioned this before, and I'm going to mention it again. This is a new one today. I was on Reddit under one of my sock puppet accounts, and there was the first time home buyers subreddit. I don't know why it keeps popping up. It's got nothing. I'm not a first time home buyer, so it's good. It means it doesn't know anything about me. But anyway, there was yet another person, a young lady, in front of her house saying, "This is my first house. So happy." And it's great. But she made an attempt. She'd blocked out the number of the house, but the recycling can was in the background with the area, so I knew exactly where it was. There was the GeoSpy website that also basically confirmed the area that I found, and she'd put the price that she purchased the house for, first time home. It took me seconds. I went to Zillow, put the price range from and to at the exact price she said she purchased it for, put the approximate area in. I knew roughly where it was, and I could tell it was a 1 or 2 bedroom house, so I did the maximum rooms of no more than 2 bedrooms, and just had to scroll through a few images. Bingo, there it is. And that's how easy open source intelligence can be. I didn't have to use sophisticated tools. I didn't have to sift through data breaches or anything like that, or have access to public records. I just looked through Zillow. Simple as that. Now, you may think, well, what's the harm? You know, she's just a first-time home buyer. She's pleased with herself. Well, you might see there is no harm initially, but these are often archived. Even if she deletes that post, now it's on the Wayback Machine. It's archived online. One day, she may have an ex-boyfriend or a stalker or some situation where she wants to keep her home address private. But now, her Reddit username is tied to her house, which I can get the real address from. In fact, looking through the comments and posts, I know what her employer is. I know what she does for a living. I know how much she earns. I know exactly who the mortgage lender was. Just through all the questions that people were asking her, she's revealed so much. I've got her date of birth, everything that could be used against that person. So we've got to be really careful why we're doing this. But let's go to the why, back to this herd mentality again. Whether they are aware of this or not, they are doing it for a boost to their ego. That results in a dopamine hit. When people start liking and following and you get more followers, this is like an episode of Black Mirror. The more likes, the more thumbs up you get, the more dopamine your brain gets. And it makes you feel good. I'm important. I've achieved something in life. If you don't share anything, then you don't get that feedback. So how do you know if you're doing the right thing? Now, I don't want to turn this into a philosophical or psychological discussion on the ego or anything like that. It could very easily turn into that. But the point I'm making is not everything has to be shared. Now, for you weirdos like me that are into security and privacy, I've had a few emails about this actually, asking about sock puppets. I like to stay in touch still with what's going on. Now, sock puppet accounts are used for numerous purposes. It doesn't have to be bad. Obviously, OSINT investigators will have them. You need to look at someone's social media profile. If you're not logged in to Facebook, it's probably not going to let you look, not in any detail anyway, into that profile. So you need a sock puppet. Now, we've done this on previous shows, so I don't want to harp on there. But having access to social media is also useful to see what people are posting about you. Now, something I often ask my family is when there's an event, such as, I don't know, someone graduates from a school or some life event, don't post it on social media. Grandparents are the worst at this. They seem to want to share everything with the world because they're proud of their grandkids or their own kids. It doesn't matter. And quite often they're like, what's the harm in that? You're being mean. You can end up into arguments by saying, please don't post this stuff. And they know I'm not on social media, but I'm still watching. Now, by not playing the game, I'm not trapped in the Apple ecosystem. Now, I know I've just bought the latest MacBook. we'll let that one fly. But I'm not in the Apple ecosystem in terms of iMessage or FaceTime or iCloud. I don't use any of that stuff. I don't have an iPhone anymore. In fact, I do. It's a spare. I use it as a burner phone if I need it. It's just in a box in a drawer, turned off. Perhaps I should put it in a Faraday bag because that's another conversation. But in terms of not playing the game, I'm not posting nonsense on social media, and LinkedIn has become a mess for this stuff. Have you seen what's on LinkedIn these days? Now, tragically, I'm sure many of you have heard there was the aeroplane crash in India, the Air India flight that crashed just after takeoff. That same day, there were people posting on LinkedIn, sharing their thoughts, and at the end, saying a call to action. This is why we need to do X, Y, Z in sales. This is why relationships matter in business. The only reason they're posting it is to get more follows and likes, and it infuriates me. So minimize what can be known is a saying, it's a motto that I really live by. Now, with my day job, I have to be very public. I speak to the media and journalists. They have my photo, they have my bio, they have everything about me. I don't like it, but listen, it pays the bills. The company I work for probably won't like it if I give them my headshot and it's pixelated with a black line across the face. I would love that, by the way, but it will probably raise too many eyebrows. So that's part of the game I still have to play. When you look at social media, when you look at the news, everything ultimately comes down to money. Money, power, control. Whether it's news about President Trump and his upset Elon Musk, then Elon Musk is retracting his tweet saying, I went a bit too far. I don't know what goes on behind the scenes. This is never going to be a political show, so we're not going to go into that. But ultimately what I'm getting at here is everything can be traced back to money. But where is the money? It's numbers on computer systems. There's no vaults of gold and cash that has the equivalent value for our whole economy. That's nonsense. You could literally, it's called quantitative easing. You could just type some numbers in on the system and hey, now the country has got X amount of $1 billion extra. It's one giant monopoly game. And when you see what feeds it and you trace the breadcrumbs all the way down, miles and miles and miles, this is why you got people out of desperation posting nonsense on social media, trying to get follows, trying to get likes, to promote the product, to get sponsors, to do whatever it may be. And listen, I'm not saying that everyone has to drop out entirely and live like a recluse in the middle of nowhere, because we all have families. And I'll be honest, if it was just me, I probably would be living in some unidentified cabin or even a cave system somewhere like a complete recluse. So where else can we take this line of thinking, stop playing the game? Cameras. The reason people upgrade their iPhones and spend such a lot of money, and don't forget now, to get an iPhone with any decent amount of storage is well over $1,000, if not $1,500 for the latest iPhone. It's crazy. Do you know that you could actually just buy a camera? Now, hear me out. I know you're not going to carry a DSLR or mirrorless camera everywhere you go. But Apple, I've heard them talk about this. They were saying you're going to have your phone, you're capturing the most meaningful moments in life, like the birth of your child or one of your children getting married or whatever it may be. Again, I'm going to sound like an old man now, but going back to the 80s, I had a film camera. Photos were meaningful and they had intention. I wasn't just taking pictures of my dinner, and all of my pictures were not being stored by some corporate entity, in this case Apple with iCloud or Google. And you can buy a really nice camera. So I actually own a few. One of my hobbies is cinematography. I have a Lumix S5. I have a Lumix S5 2X. I mainly use those for video. But Sony do some excellent cameras. And interestingly enough, my daughter has been asking more and more about cameras. And right next to me here, I've actually got a Pentax film camera that used to be my mother's from the 80s. In fact, if you've ever watched Stranger Things, Jonathan, who was taking pictures through the window and there was a pool party going on, if you remember that scene, I've got that very camera, including the flash, although I'm not taking pictures of ladies getting dressed in the window outside their pool. Moving on, the point is these cameras are really fun to get into. Now, I'm not saying buy a film camera, that would be the ultimate, but then you've got to get it developed and then you've got some weirdo looking at your pictures. But some of the latest digital cameras, the mirrorless cameras in particular, are really nice. And the point is, you're not carrying it everywhere you go. And then you're using it to take meaningful pictures of life events. So what the point is here, you don't need an iPhone with the latest camera. Now, I've still got a Google Pixel 8 Pro. I love it. The camera's not as good as the latest iPhone, but it's good enough if I just need to take a picture on the go. Usually it's of a receipt or for my expenses or something interesting I see that I want to share over Signal with friends or family. But then I have my main cameras with my choice of lenses and that intention behind capturing the photo, which I just really love. And guess what? It doesn't touch the cloud at all. My pictures are on my laptop, on my PC. They're synced with Nextcloud. And the benefit of that as well is I've got my raw photo, I have a JPEG, and I just have a lot more control over the pictures. Now back to playing this game. One of the biggest traps I think we all suffer from is YouTube. YouTube has literally dominated the entertainment industry. Now I'm not talking about them competing with Netflix for streaming and things like that, but if you think about the watch hours in terms of content, I would bet that YouTube has the number one spot. People don't always want to watch a movie. People don't always want to watch some long TV series. Now, when the new Stranger Things comes out, sure, I'll be watching that. But so many people, myself included, are spending so much time now watching, I must admit, nonsense on YouTube. This doesn't even have to be short form. It could be an hour-long debate. I actually watched, there's a channel called Intelligence Squared, and I was watching some debates on there. Anyway, the point is, there's a lot of content on there that I don't want to sit down and watch a documentary or a whole TV series or movie, but I am interested in a 20 or 30-minute video on a certain topic. But YouTube is also social media. It can get dangerous. There's people commenting, you're reading the comments, and it's suggesting the next video to you, which is why, and this is a suggestion from a listener, and so thank you to that listener that suggested this, I now use GrayJay. It is amazing. It's a great app. So if you watch Twitch or Rumble or YouTube or any of these platforms, what GrayJay is, and it's actually developed by Futo, and I mentioned this in previous shows, I use Futo keyboard and Futo voice. GrayJay doesn't need you to log in or sign up, but you can still subscribe. Now, you're not really subscribing to a YouTube. They're not going to see the subscription, that's your YouTube creator. So it's like a fake subscription, but it means when you go into the GrayJay app, you can see all the videos from the feeds you subscribe to. And that's the point. It's really great for privacy. No one knows who I am. No one's tracking the subscriptions or seeing me as a subscriber or tracking likes. Now, you can sign up. I've not created an account, so I don't really know what that looks like, but I can see there's a login. And then if you log in, then it will sync between devices and things like that. You're essentially maintaining that information. But to me, this is far better than actually using the YouTube platform. So it seems they have an app for Android, not iOS, which is actually a good thing. So if that's disappointing, then get a Google Pixel and put Graphene OS on there. And there's also Linux, Mac, and also Windows. I haven't tried the Windows app. It's not something I want to use. This is just something for when I'm on the go. But maybe I will check that out. And if any of you use GrayJay and use the Windows or the Linux or even the Mac desktop app, then let me know. Tell me what you think. Now, the other one out there, which I've looked at, is NewPipe. And I'll put the links to these in the show notes so you can check them out. But it has a similar idea. But I think this is really positive for us in the privacy community, that these apps like GrayJay, and I love the look of it, the user interface is great. It's not terrible at all to use. And we are heading in the right direction, which I really like. Now, finally, I promised to share the URL to the Matrix community. So if you go to my podcast link on the website, so that's psysecure.com, PSY, secure.com, go to the podcast link and you'll see join the Matrix community and it says enter password. This isn't meant to be ultra secure or anything. This is just to stop bots really from harvesting it and potentially joining the community. So the password is minimize data. That's all one word. Capital M for minimize, capital D for data. Click unlock community and it will open a URL for you and you can join that. Now, I use the Element client on my desktop and also on my Graphene OS device. Now, several members have already joined on there, and it's great to see that the community are talking to each other. So it's not all on me, but it's also a great way to get in touch with me directly. You can find me in there. You can send me a direct message if you don't want to share everything in the channel, or there's rooms. So I've got Lockdown General, Lockdown Introductions. So please go into introductions, by the way, and introduce yourself and make it up. I don't know, a 70-year-old professor, whatever you want to put in there. Just say hi. There's a lockdown podcast room as well if you want to discuss the show or just complain to say I've been away for too long. Where is he? But yeah, please join. There's several members already, and it would be great to get an infusion of new listeners in there as well. And as mentioned in the last episode, I have a Capture the Flag challenge. Now, it's not live yet, so don't go digging around. Well, you can dig around if you like. You're not going to find anything. So if you go to the Ghost in the Source page on my scisecure.com, on the main page you see that Ghost in the Source picture. You click on that. The URL is /CTF if you want to go directly to it. And we have, as I record this now, there are 7 days remaining before I unlock the challenge. Now, the challenge will open on June 21st at 12 p.m. That's Eastern Daylight Time. And there's no rush. This is not going to be first come or first to win is the first ones to receive the prize. I'm going to be giving away 3 6-month subscriptions to Try Hack Me. I wanted to invest the Patreon donations I've received so far and give that back to the community as a thank you. So we're going to do this as an experiment, really. This is going to be the first time we're doing this. And there's no rush, as I say. So on June 21st, something will change on the site somewhere. And that something is going to reveal, and actually I'm not going to say any more than that. It's going to reveal something. Have a look around. Look at the source code. Dig around the site. Now, the rules are, and I've got the rules on the page. So again, scisecure.com/CTF. You will see what's out of scope. So no server attacks, no network or port scanning. You don't need to do denial of service attacks, or certainly no social engineering. Now, my website is fronted by Cloudflare to protect against some of this. But hey, this is just a source code only challenge. Dig around the site, see what you can find. And I'm hoping this will just be a bit of fun. Now, if you find the flag, this will be after June 21st, just use the contact form on my website and put the subject CTF challenge submission, and then send me the code you find. But also, I don't just want the code. I want a description of your technique, your approach, how you found it. Now, for some, it may be super easy. For others, you might just get very frustrated. But if that's the case, don't worry. There's going to be future challenges. And I'm probably thinking of an OSINT challenge or something of a similar nature later on. But the point of this, as well as a give back, there's a small prize involved. It's also around digging into these things just to see how vulnerable some sites can be. I still have this mindset that every time I'm interacting with a company or service that wants my details, my immediate reaction is, your system sucks, you don't know how to secure it properly, so whatever I give you is going to be exposed. And it might sound quite pessimistic, but honestly, it's the truth. It happens all the time. Now, some news on the Open Source Intelligence, Defense and Security Framework, or ODSF for short. I've been working behind the scenes in the evenings and weekends on this. I have a draft framework document. I think it's around, anywhere between 50 and 70 pages, depending on whether the intro is included, that type of thing. But it's very comprehensive. So there are 5 focus areas. There's digital footprint reduction, social engineering defense, exposure management, that's basically on technology exposure management, executive protection, and continuous monitoring and response. Now, each of these focus areas has a set of categories, and each category has a list of controls. Now, what I'm thinking initially is this is a nice to have. There's certainly no regulations or reason any organisation has to implement this, but that's in the same vein as zero trust. So I know I'm talking about cybersecurity now, but zero trust is a collection of principles, many of which, such as least privilege, have been around for decades. There's nothing new. But as a framework, as a holistic approach, it's really about protecting the organisation properly. I would say it's the martial arts of cybersecurity. If you're going to learn a discipline, then zero trust or the NIST cybersecurity framework are all excellent. But the gap I'm filling with ODSF isn't that the others don't do a good job. In fact, this is complementary. This one predominantly focuses on the reconnaissance phase of the cyber kill chain. Now, the word reconnaissance does normally conjure up images, I don't know, shadowy figures in spy movies like James Bond. But it actually is a French word, and military forces have been using this since the early 1800s. Soldiers would often scout enemy positions or map terrain, gathering intelligence before launching an attack. And this is how most cyber attacks work, as the reconnaissance phase, where intelligence is gathered, occurs first. And it was in more recent times, September 2023, when I would say some simple reconnaissance led to devastating consequences. Now, this time, it was not James Bond or Secret Agent, but this was the threat actor Scattered Spider, and it was the MGM Resorts attack in Vegas. Now, Scattered Spider aren't your group of stereotypical hackers operating out of Russia or Iran. These are individuals from the US and the UK. In fact, I've heard reports that some of them are as young as 16 years old. But they grew up in the Western world with social media, so they understand corporate culture and know exactly how to manipulate the human psychology behind business processes with the local native tongue or dialect. So they're not necessarily masterful hackers, but they are masterful people hackers because of that social engineering skill they have. Now, in the case of MGM, they spent time on LinkedIn. They were looking at the employee data, they were trying to understand the company's IT structure, and they basically found exactly what they needed. And it was literally laying there in the wide open. These are names, job titles, technology stacks, all with enough context around the organisation to convincingly impersonate IT support staff, which is exactly what they did. They'll trick a user into installing what's called an RMM tool or a remote management tool, such as TeamViewer or AnyDesk or any of those remote access solutions, and then they're in. And if you think about it, imagine you're a very wealthy individual with a mansion, great big house, and you have state-of-the-art security systems, cameras all around the perimeter, you've got a wall surrounding the place. I don't know, say you've even got a security guard at the front door. You've invested in all this great technology and security, which is what organisations are doing. But now imagine that I can do some OSINT and find out that you left a review on Google for a housekeeping service. Now I go, now I know who the housekeeping service is you use. So now I approach their house disguised as a housekeeper. And this is, I'm sure, a trope that you've seen in many movies. And I say, oh yeah, the housekeeper's off sick, I'm filling in for them. Oh, okay, and I'm just welcomed through the front door, bypassing all the security that they've been invested in, which is basically what happened in the case of MGM Resorts in 2023. And while OSINT is an area that we all love from a privacy standpoint, because we want to know where our data is and how we can remove it and minimize that, OSINT from a defensive point of view is just something organizations are not doing. So I'm very excited about it. Let's see where it goes. If it dies a death, at least I tried to share my knowledge in the form of OSINT defense. But hopefully this will gain some traction, and it may take some time, but let's see. Now, for the last few months, I've been traveling a lot, and something I noticed, especially at airports, was what I call security pantomime. I was coming back from Canada with a bottle of maple syrup, like you do. Something you have to do. I hear it's against the law to leave Canada without at least one bottle of maple syrup. So that's what I did. And I didn't really think. I got stopped at the airport security in Canada, and it was over the limit for liquid that I can bring through security. So they kept it, and I'm sure they're enjoying it right now. Now, the problem with that is this. If I really wanted to build a biological weapon or something like that, I don't need vast amounts of liquid. You could probably do something really bad with a small amount. Now, I've got to be careful here what I say, because I'm sure the NSA are listening and I don't want them to get the wrong impression, but I'm sure someone with ill intentions could bring lots of smaller bottles of liquid and do something nefarious on that flight. Anyway, they knew that this was just a bottle of maple syrup. It was sealed. I had the receipt. The risk is very low, but they still have to follow their policy and follow the playbook and confiscate it. But this is what I see happening in cybersecurity in some respects, which affects us as privacy enthusiasts. Now, let me give you an example. Now, I've had many emails about my podcast won't load on VPN and they've got to disconnect or change VPN server. And it's happening to me as well. It's incredibly infuriating. Now, I've been using Buzzsprout as the podcast host, and it's probably not something they're doing intentionally. It's probably a content delivery network or some security layer that's blocking VPNs. But that is also security pantomime. Now, let me explain why. I would say cyber criminals, ransomware gangs, anyone that's doing some very bad things online are not just using a commercial VPN service. They use proxies, they use residential IPs, info stealers, and malware. There are many ways criminals use a real IP address they don't want to have and stand out as, on Proton VPN or private internet access or Mulvad or any of those. They want to blend in, so they want to look like a usual residence IP address at a regular provider. And they will do that through malware. There's various game hacks, cheats, pirate software, any way they can hide info stealers, but also their proxy services in there. They want to end up with basically a botnet, this army of machines that they can connect to it used to be used for DDoS attacks. You get tens or hundreds of thousands of machines around the world hammering a single site, you're going to take it down. But it's also useful to conduct their illegal activities. They're not going to be using Proton VPN. It's ridiculous. So these companies blocking VPNs, and you've probably seen it. My daughter was trying to buy theatre tickets a few weeks ago. It just kept saying payment failed. When we called them, it was actually nothing to do with the payment, despite it being a privacy card, but it wasn't that. They said, it's because you're on a VPN. Simple as that. So they have these anti-fraud measures, these security layers in place, trying to prevent fraud. And it may be that a lot of fraud and stolen credit cards and the less sophisticated criminal are using a VPN. But it's almost like shutting down the freeway because I've heard that thieves are using it to transport their goods. So let's just block the whole freeway. Let's not let anyone cross it because it can be used for bad purposes. VPN as a whole is not used for any bad purpose other than for us protecting ourselves. Although, let's just talk about this for a minute, because I've seen, and going back to YouTube, so many videos where VPN is the sponsor, and Joe Rogan does this and a few other podcasters, and they will talk about how you got to protect your privacy and protect your identity, and then they say that you got to buy VPN. First off, that's stupid and ridiculous. In fact, let's just listen to one of these ads. And this is not an ad, by the way. I'm going to just show you a clip. But just listen to this so you can see what I mean.
Some people think, I don't need a VPN because I have nothing to hide. But that's exactly what data brokers want you to think, because their profits depend on you having nothing to hide. Like at a hotel, airport, or coffee shop, anyone can hijack your connection and access your most sensitive information.
Okay, that's slightly misleading. Now, certainly 25 years ago, so we're talking the early 2000s, most sites would use unencrypted HTTP. So email providers, for example, would just be HTTP. So if someone was packet sniffing on the network on a public Wi-Fi, it's very easy to do. I could grab that password. And then obviously banks and things would use HTTPS to protect against that type of thing. But now with HTTPS everywhere, that data in transit, those passwords, sensitive data, even on untrusted networks, are not going to be easily sniffed out. The real threat, and you've got to think of the likelihood of this, but let's assume that it's likely, is from things called evil twins. There's a device, for example, called Wi-Fi Pineapple. You can Google it. And essentially you can create an evil twin access point, let's say mimicking Starbucks Wi-Fi. And then you can do things like DNS spoofing, redirecting people to the fake version of a legitimate site. So I could redirect you to a fake version of Gmail and grab your password. I could even do things like a SSL man in the middle attack or stripping attack. Although I must say most modern browsers have got a lot better at preventing these attacks. So yes, there's a risk, but the way these people, these ads make out is that we're stuck in the early 2000s, that everything's HTTP and you have to be on a VPN, otherwise everything's going to get sniffed. That's not strictly true. A VPN isn't going to make you anonymous. If the government provide a court subpoena to the VPN provider to turn on logging, even though they don't do logging by default, they could technically turn it on for you to track you. But the way these VPNs are advertised is there's some sort of invisible cloak and you can't be found. It's just one layer of many. That's all it is. And the only reason I use VPN, and I have it on all the time, is I just don't want my residential IP address in all the logs of every single site I visit. They have no right to know that. End of story. Now, residential proxies are also used, not just by criminals, but for web scraping. And some of the services for these proxies are very expensive, certainly compared to a VPN provider. But essentially, they give you either a 5G connection or someone's home internet connection. And if you have hundreds of those, it does open up a world of possibility for not only cyber criminals, but for web scraping and other purposes as well. I'll leave it there. But it's one of these areas that just frustrates me when I think that the short-sightedness of a security team at a company think, well, let's just block VPNs. Another example, in fact, is the Starbucks app. I don't know if it's unique to Android. As many of you will know, I have an alias name for my Starbucks app. They block the paste command. So they're basically making it very difficult to use a complex password. It's almost inviting a simple password like Apple123. It's ridiculous. Now with KeePass DX, there's a password keyboard you can use. So I have to use that, and then you have to unlock the password database, and then the keyboard essentially types the passwords. You can get around it that way. But it's still frustrating. Why block copy and paste for things like your email or password field? What on earth does that achieve? All it does is prevent people from using their password manager, and it doesn't make any sense to me at all. It's just frustrating. So security pantomime is a thing. There's certain practices out there where they're blocking and restricting us for no reason other than thinking, well, you just got to do it. We've always done it that way. They don't even use critical thinking here. It's like when you're on a flight. Before takeoff, they want you to put laptops and phones and tablets on airplane mode. That doesn't actually do anything. From a scientific point of view, there is no risk whatsoever to having your phone not in airplane mode. The worst thing I think that can happen is you're up in the air, your phone is searching for cell phone towers all the time, and you're going to run the battery lower a bit quicker than you would usually. So that's the only reason I put it in airplane mode. Same thing at the gas station. You're at the pump, and quite often you'll see a label, do not use your phone. Danger. There's no danger. Your car, unless you've got an electric car, of course, has got a red hot exhaust manifold and an alternator that's got sparks going on in there. There's more risk from the vehicle itself than having a mobile phone near the pump. Anyway, it's crazy. I just wanted to vent and let that one out there, see what you think. Keep your emails coming in. It's lockdownpodcast@protonmail.com. 1 week to go for the Capture the Flag challenge. And please join the Matrix community. Once again, if you go to psysecure.com, that's psysecure.com, click on the podcast link, and the password is minimize data. That's all one word, capital M, capital D, and you'll get the URL for the Matrix community. I'd love to see you in there. There's several people already, so let's invite your friends if you like. As long as they're privacy enthusiasts and we want to nerd out about that stuff, then please join and use alias names, introduce yourself, Gandalf the Grey, whatever you want to call yourself. It would be great to hear from you. So with that, I will see you in the Matrix.